My mom left a voicemail saying, "You're out. Don't come back. We're moving on without you." I texted back, "Okay." I moved on first. Trust locked. House finalized. By the next morning, 46 missed calls and a message from their lawyer appeared. "We have a serious problem." I laughed out loud and replied. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when my phone buzzed. I saw Mom flash on the screen, and I almost didn't pick up. I wish I hadn't, because what I heard next wasn't just a voicemail. It was a wrecking ball to 32 years of my life. "You're out. Don't come back. We're moving on without you." Main story. That cold, final voice. I'd heard it only twice before. Once, when she fired her personal assistant over a minor accounting error. And once, when she cut off her own brother after a disagreement about Thanksgiving seating. 7 seconds. 12 words. That was it. 32 years of being her daughter erased. I just sat there in my home office, staring at my phone, waiting for it to offer some kind of explanation. The cursor blinked on my computer screen, mocking me. Outside, Mrs. Patterson's dog barked at nothing, just like every other night. Everything felt disturbingly normal for a moment that should have shattered my entire world. My finger hovered over the call back button. A part of me, the old me, craved answers, desperate to know what imaginary crime I'd committed this time. But a larger, much wiser part of me, the one that had been quietly growing stronger over the years, knew better. Mom didn't do conversations. She issued declarations. And she expected immediate compliance, groveling, or preferably both. So I typed out a response instead. Okay. 1 word. 2 syllables. 5 letters. It felt like liberation. Acceptance. It felt like power. Then I did something I'd been planning for months, something I never quite had the courage to execute. I opened my laptop and pulled up the family trust documents. My dad had insisted I be co-trustee 3 years ago when he passed. Mom protested, of course. He'd said something vague about balance and oversight then, which I hadn't fully understood. But understanding? That came later. Piece by painful piece, as I watched her manipulate financial decisions and family dynamics with breathtaking ruthlessness. This trust wasn't just a pile of money. It controlled everything. The sprawling family estate in Westchester, commercial properties in Manhattan, a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio that had flourished under my careful management. And most importantly, the beach house in Cape Cod, a place that had been in our family for 4 generations. Dad, bless his brilliant, foresightful soul, had structured it so that major decisions required both trustees' signatures. Mom could suggest, propose, argue, even scream all she wanted. But she couldn't execute transfers or sales without my approval. For 18 months, she'd been trying to sell that Cape Cod property. Some developer offered an obscene amount, wanted to tear down our family's history and build luxury condos. Mom saw dollar signs. I saw the porch where Dad taught me to read, the kitchen where Grandma Catherine showed me how to make her famous blueberry pie, the dock where I'd spent countless summers learning that silence could be companionship, not punishment. I'd been stalling, finding every procedural reason to delay, hoping she'd eventually value something beyond profit margins. That hope? It died somewhere around the 7th word of her voicemail. I pulled up my email and composed a message to Lawrence Garrett, the trust attorney. The subject line? Formal exercise of co-trustee authority. Property transaction termination. Professional. Clean. Irrevocable. The email detailed my immediate withdrawal of consent for the Cape Cod sale, my denial of the pending Westchester property refinancing Mom had proposed, and a formal request for a complete audit of all trust transactions from the past 24 months. I'd noticed irregularities for a while now, small things that didn't quite add up. Now, it felt like the perfect time to examine them under a microscope. I hit send at 12:23 a.m. Then, I changed all my passwords, enabled 2-factor authentication, and forwarded copies of everything to a personal email Mom had never, ever had access to. Sleep should have been impossible. My mind should have been racing. But I went to bed, and I slept better than I had in years. Morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through my bedroom curtains, and the sound of my phone absolutely losing its mind. 46 missed calls. 17 voicemails. 63 text messages. I didn't even glance at it. First, coffee. Then I took my time selecting a mug, even scrambled some eggs. Then I bothered to look. The messages followed a predictable, almost comical progression. The first few from Mom alternated between confusion and irritation. Call me immediately. What is this nonsense Lawrence is talking about? Stop being childish. Then Aunt Pamela, of course, got involved, leaving breathy messages about family unity and not making rash decisions. My cousin Trevor sent a series of increasingly frantic texts about how I was ruining everything and being selfish, which, honestly, was rich coming from someone who'd borrowed $40,000 from the trust for a business venture that turned out to be a timeshare in Atlantic City. But the message that made me actually laugh out loud came from Sterling and Ross, the law firm Mom had clearly called in a blind panic. Midway subscribe line. By the way, if this story of family betrayal and unexpected empowerment is resonating with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the wild rides and hard-won lessons still to come. The attorney was Gerald Winters, and his email carried the kind of barely contained alarm that suggested Mom had already screamed at him at least twice. Miss Hayes. It read, "We represent Constance Hayes and matters pertaining to the Hayes Family Trust. We have a serious problem that requires immediate discussion. Please contact our offices at your earliest convenience." I read it 3 times, savoring every carefully chosen word. The serious problem was clear. Mom had apparently promised the developers that the Cape Cod sale would close within 30 days. She'd probably already spent that money in her head, planning out how she'd allocate funds without consulting me. The refinancing on the Westchester property was likely meant to cover some shortfall I didn't even know about yet. I replied to Gerald Winters with the exact same energy I'd given Mom's voicemail. Per trust documents executed by Harold Hayes in March 2019, I am under no obligation to approve transactions I believe contradict the trust's stated purpose of maintaining family legacy assets. My position is final. All future communications should go through my attorney, Christina Ville at Morrison and Associates. Christina had been my attorney for 6 months, a total shark with a reputation for being absolutely fearless in family trust disputes. She charged $450 an hour, and she was worth every single penny. Mom naturally called again. I let it go to voicemail and continued eating my breakfast. Mom, of course, had no idea. She couldn't have because she never bothered to ask about my life. But what she didn't know is that I'd been quietly, unconsciously, preparing for this possibility for over a year. Every time she dismissed my concerns about trust management or rolled her eyes at my questions about documentation, I'd been building a fortress of information and legal protection. I'd started keeping meticulous records of every conversation, dates, times, specific quotes. When she'd casually mentioned exploring options for the Cape Cod property at last year's Christmas dinner, I documented it. When she'd brushed off my questions about consulting fees with a dismissive "family business is complicated, sweetheart," I wrote down her exact words, her tone. Dad had taught me that documentation was power. He'd worked in contract law for 37 years before his heart attack, and one of the last coherent conversations we'd had was about protecting this trust. He looked at me with those clear, gray eyes and said, "Your mother loves you, but she loves control more. Don't let her confuse the two." I hadn't understood then. Not really. But sitting at my kitchen table now, watching my phone light up with increasingly frantic messages, I understood perfectly. Around 10 that morning, my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera. Aunt Pamela stood on my porch, dressed in what I immediately recognized as her serious intervention outfit. Tailored navy suit, pearls, the whole 9 yards. She'd worn the exact same thing when she tried to convince Dad's brother to sell his construction company at a loss during the 2008 recession. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as she rang the bell 4 more times, peered through my front windows, and eventually tucked a handwritten note into my mailbox. The note, which I retrieved an hour later, was a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as concern. "Dearest Natalie," it read, "your mother is beside herself with worry. Whatever misunderstanding has occurred, I'm certain we can resolve it as a family. Please call me at your earliest convenience so we can discuss this rationally. Family is everything, and we must protect what your father built. With love and concern, Aunt Pamela." The word rationally was underlined twice. The implication, of course, being that I was the irrational one. My response to being disowned via voicemail was somehow the unreasonable element in this equation. I took a photo of the note and forwarded it to Christina with the caption, "Evidence of coordinated pressure campaign. Document everything." Her response was almost immediate. "Already on it. Keep a log of all contact attempts. This shows consciousness of guilt on their part." By noon, the situation had escalated to DEFCON 1 levels of family emergency. My uncle, who I hadn't spoken to in probably 5 years, left a rambling message about thinking of Dad and what he would have wanted. Even my college roommate called, which meant Mom had somehow tracked down people from my past to create an intervention coalition. The message from my roommate was apologetic, confused, clearly the result of whatever story Mom had spun about her ungrateful, unstable daughter having some kind of breakdown. I spent the afternoon doing exactly what I should have done years ago, a comprehensive review of every trust transaction since Dad died. What I found made my earlier suspicions look quaint. Mom had been systematically inflating management fees, routing them through a consulting company that, it turned out, was owned by Aunt Pamela's husband. She'd approved a loan of $75,000 to Trevor without any proper documentation or repayment terms. There were property tax payments that seemed too high, maintenance expenses that didn't match actual work done, and a mysterious series of transfers labeled estate preservation that totaled nearly $200,000 over 18 months. Each transaction, individually, was small enough to avoid triggering automatic reviews. Together, they painted a picture of someone treating a family trust like a personal checking account. I forwarded everything to Christina with a simple note. How illegal is this? Her response came back in under an hour. Extremely. We should talk. We talked for 90 minutes. Christina explained breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, possible fraud, and a dozen other legal terms that basically meant Mom had been stealing from her own family's legacy. The trust documents were ironclad. Dad had made sure of that. Every transaction required proper documentation, legitimate business purposes, and equal benefit to all beneficiaries. Mom had violated roughly 70% of those provisions. We can file for removal of her as trustee, Christina said. You take sole control, and she'd likely face serious legal consequences. Or we can offer a settlement. She resigns, repays what she's taken, and we don't pursue criminal charges. The old me, the one who'd spent her life trying to avoid family drama and scandal, would have chosen the settlement instantly. But that version of myself had received a voicemail telling her she was out, that her own mother was moving on without her, like she was a failed business venture instead of a human being. Before I could respond, Christina added something that sealed my decision. I should mention that if you go the settlement route, there's nothing stopping her from doing this again with a different trust or estate. People like your mother don't change their behavior without serious consequences. They just get better at hiding it. I thought about Trevor's kids, 7 and 9. I thought about my cousin Andrea's daughter, who would turn 18 in 6 years. I thought about future generations who might end up managing assets with someone who'd proven she couldn't be trusted with fiduciary responsibility. File for removal, I said. And I want that audit completed by an independent forensic accountant. Every transaction, every receipt, everything. Christina's smile was almost audible through the phone. I was hoping you'd say that. The week between retaining Christina and filing the actual paperwork was surreal in its intensity. Mom apparently realized she'd made a tactical error with that voicemail because her approach shifted dramatically. The angry, dismissive messages stopped. Instead, I started receiving what I privately called the reconciliation offensive. First came the flowers. Massive arrangements delivered to my office 3 days in a row, each with increasingly elaborate cards. Thinking of you, sweetheart. Family forever with love. Missing my daughter. My coworkers were, initially, impressed by the displays until I explained the context. After that, they started referring to them as guilt bouquets and placing bets on how many more would arrive. Then came the package. A velvet box containing my grandmother's sapphire bracelet, the one I'd been told was lost after Grandma Catherine died. The accompanying note read, "Found this while organizing. It should be yours. Love always, Mom." The bracelet was worth about $15,000, but its sentimental value was incalculable. Grandma Catherine had worn it every single day of her adult life. I'd asked about it repeatedly after the funeral, only to be told it must have been misplaced during a state settlement. Now, suddenly, it appeared, pristine and perfectly preserved, just when Mom needed leverage. I took photos of everything, documented the delivery times, and added it all to the growing file Christina was building. Attempted bribery, she called it. Evidence of Mom's awareness that she's overplayed her hand. The phone calls evolved, too. Mom stopped leaving voicemails and started showing up in places she knew I'd be. She appeared at my gym one morning, in casual, expensive workout clothes she'd clearly purchased specifically for the ambush. I saw her through the window before I even went inside and drove to a different location across town. She tried my favorite coffee shop, standing near the entrance like she just happened to be there. I ordered through a mobile app and had someone else pick it up. She even showed up at my office building, waiting in the lobby with an expression that managed to convey both wounded mother and patient martyr. Security called up to warn me, and I left through the parking garage. Each failed attempt was documented. Each one added to a pattern that Christina assured me would be useful in court. Judges don't like coercion, she explained. And what she's doing is textbook coercive behavior, cutting you off when she thought she had power, then desperately trying to reel you back in when she realized you held the actual leverage. The legal paperwork hit the following Monday. Mom received formal notice that I was petitioning the court to remove her as trustee based on breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, and mismanagement of trust assets. The filing included a preliminary accounting showing the questionable transactions and requesting a full forensic audit at Mom's expense. My phone basically exploded. This time, the messages weren't confused or irritated. They were panicked, angry, desperate. Mom left a voicemail that started with threats and ended with something that might have been tears, but could just as easily have been pure rage. Aunt Pamela's husband called from 3 different numbers, each message more aggressive than the last. Trevor's texts devolved into personal attacks and creative profanity. But there were other messages, too. My cousin Andrea, who I'd lost touch with after she moved to Oregon, sent a long email about how she'd always suspected something was wrong with the trust management and was grateful someone finally had the courage to investigate. Dad's brother, Uncle Lawrence, called to offer quiet support, mentioning that he'd had his own concerns about Mom's financial decisions for years. Even Mrs. Patterson from next door stopped me while I was getting my mail to say she'd heard through the grapevine about some family troubles and wanted me to know she thought I'd always been the smart, sensible one. The court hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Christina warned me it would get uglier before it got better, and she was absolutely right. Mom hired 3 different law firms, apparently hoping that volume would compensate for a lack of actual legal standing. They filed motions, counterclaims, demands for emergency injunctions. One attorney argued I was mentally unstable and acting under duress. Another claimed I'd manipulated Dad during his final illness to secure trustee status. A third submitted a petition suggesting I be removed for abuse of fiduciary authority because I wouldn't approve the Cape Cod sale. Every filing was more desperate than the last, and every single one revealed just how little legal ground they had to stand on. Christina dismantled them methodically. She submitted Dad's original trust documents, showing his explicit intentions to preserve family properties. She provided email evidence of my repeated attempts to discuss transactions with Mom, all of which had been dismissed or ignored. She included testimony from the trust's original attorney, who confirmed Dad had specifically wanted dual trustees to prevent exactly the kind of unilateral decision-making Mom had been attempting. The forensic accountant's preliminary report arrived 3 weeks before the hearing. 37 pages of detailed analysis. It was devastating. The actual misappropriation totaled closer to $400,000 once everything was properly traced. The consulting fees had no legitimate business purpose. The loans violated trust provisions. The estate preservation transfers had gone to accounts that benefited Mom personally, rather than the trust itself. The forensic accountant, a brilliant woman named Dr. Patricia Monroe, who specialized in financial fraud cases, had found patterns I'd missed even with my careful review. She traced the consulting company's ownership through 3 shell corporations before connecting it definitively to Aunt Pamela's husband. She documented how the inflated property management fees coincided exactly with Mom's purchase of a luxury condo in Miami that she'd somehow never mentioned to me. She'd even found evidence that Mom had been undervaluing trust assets on required disclosures while simultaneously using them as collateral for personal loans. "Your mother is sophisticated in her deception," Dr. Monroe told me during a video conference. "These aren't amateur mistakes. Someone taught her how to structure transactions to avoid immediate detection. The spacing of the withdrawals, the variety of justifications, the layering of corporate structures. This suggests planning and intent." I asked who might have taught her, though I already suspected the answer. "The consulting company was established 7 months after your father's death," Dr. Monroe said. "The incorporation documents list your aunt's husband as president and your mother as secretary. They filed for an LLC classification that provides certain tax advantages and liability protections. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a coordinated strategy." So Mom and Aunt Pamela had been working together from the beginning, dividing up Dad's legacy like it was community property, instead of a trust meant to benefit multiple generations. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised me, but something about the sheer premeditation made it worse. They planned this while I was still grieving, while I was trying to figure out how to be a trustee and honor Dad's wishes. Christina reviewed Dr. Monroe's findings and added another layer to our case. "We're going to request that the court consider whether your aunt's husband should be required to repay the consulting fees as an accessory to the breach. And I think we should ask for a temporary restraining order preventing your mother from accessing any trust assets while this case is pending." The restraining order was granted within 48 hours. Judge Raines reviewed the preliminary forensic report and Mom's pattern of attempted contact, then issued an order freezing all trust accounts except for a small operating fund I could access for legitimate expenses. Mom couldn't sell anything, couldn't transfer anything, couldn't even pay herself the modest trustee fee the documents allowed. I heard about her reaction third hand, through a cousin who heard it from Aunt Pamela. Apparently, Mom had been at her country club when she tried to use a credit card attached to one of the trust accounts for her monthly membership fees. The card was declined. When she called the bank, they informed her the account was frozen by court order. She left the club immediately, drove straight to her attorney's office, and proceeded to have what witnesses described as a complete meltdown. A part of me, I won't lie, felt a deep, primal satisfaction at that image. But a larger part just felt tired. This was my mother, the woman who taught me to ride a bike and helped me study for college entrance exams. The woman who'd thrown me a surprise party for my 30th birthday and cried at my graduate school commencement. How had we gotten here? When had money become more important than the relationship itself? But I knew the answer. Money had always been important to Mom. Maybe more important than anything else. I'd just been too young, too hopeful, too invested in the fantasy of who I wanted her to be, rather than accepting who she actually was. This goes beyond civil breach, Christina told me during one of our preparation sessions. The district attorney might be interested in this. I hadn't wanted it to go that far. But then Mom's attorneys filed a motion accusing me of elder abuse and financial exploitation. The irony was so thick you could serve it at Thanksgiving dinner. The elder abuse accusation particularly stunned me because it was so transparently a projection. The motion claimed I was isolating Mom from family, preventing her from accessing resources she needed, and using my position as trustee to control and manipulate her. It painted me as a calculating predator who'd somehow brainwashed Dad into making me co-trustee specifically so I could steal the family's wealth. Christina actually laughed when she read it. They're describing exactly what your mother did to you. The voicemail alone proves she's the one attempting isolation. And the financial records show who's actually been misappropriating funds. This motion is going to backfire spectacularly. She was right, but it still hurt. It hurt to see those accusations in formal legal documents, to know that somewhere in Mom's mind she convinced herself this narrative was true. Or maybe she knew it was false and simply didn't care, willing to say anything that might shift the court's perception in her favor. The motion included declarations from 3 family members, Aunt Pamela, Trevor, and my cousin Madison, who I'd barely spoken to in years. Each one testified to my concerning behavior, my paranoid accusations, my alienation from family values. Madison's declaration even mentioned that I'd skipped the last 2 family reunion events, presenting this as evidence of my antisocial tendencies. Rather than acknowledging that both events had been scheduled during work trips, I told everyone about months in advance. Christina filed a response that included the voicemail recording, transcripts of the dozens of increasingly threatening messages I'd received, photos of Aunt Pamela at my door and Mom at my workplace, and a timeline of my documented attempts to communicate with Mom about trust business that she had ignored or dismissed. She also submitted declarations from 3 of my colleagues attesting to my professional competence and emotional stability, plus a statement from my therapist confirming I'd been in regular counseling for over 2 years and showed no signs of the instability Mom's attorneys alleged. Do what you think is right, I said. I'm done protecting people who never protected me. The hearing itself was almost anticlimactic. Mom showed up with Aunt Pamela and Trevor, all 3 of them dressed like they were attending a funeral. And maybe in a way they were. The funeral of their access to money they'd always treated as rightfully theirs, regardless of what Dad's intentions had been. The judge was a woman in her early 60s named Victoria Rains, who had a reputation for zero tolerance regarding fiduciary malfeasance. She reviewed the forensic report, examined the trust documents, and listened to both sides. Mom's attorneys tried to paint me as vindictive and unstable, motivated by personal grievances rather than legitimate trust management concerns. Judge Rains cut them off mid-argument. Counselors, I've reviewed the evidence. Personal dynamics are irrelevant when we're discussing documented violations of fiduciary duty. Do you have any actual defense regarding the transactions themselves? They didn't. What they had were excuses, explanations about how Mom had intended to document things properly, how the fees were reasonable given her time investment. None of it addressed the fundamental fact that she'd violated trust provisions repeatedly and systematically. The judge's ruling took less than 10 minutes to deliver. Mom was removed as trustee immediately, required to repay all misappropriated funds within 90 days, and barred from any future role in trust administration. I was granted sole trustee authority with oversight from an independent trust monitor for the first year to ensure proper procedures going forward. Mrs. Hayes, Judge Rains said, looking directly at my mother, her voice crisp and clear, you were given a position of trust and responsibility, and you abused it. The fact that the beneficiaries are your family members makes this worse, not better. You should be grateful your daughter is showing restraint and not pursuing criminal charges. Mom's face went through several shades of red and white. Aunt Pamela grabbed her arm like she might physically collapse. Trevor just stared at me with naked hatred that probably should have bothered me more than it did. But I felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication, just a sort of hollow relief that it was finally over. The aftermath took months to fully resolve. Mom tried to negotiate the repayment terms, claiming she didn't have liquid assets to cover the full amount. Christina, ever prepared, got copies of her bank statements that told a very different story. The money came back in installments, each payment probably causing Mom actual physical pain. The repayment process itself became another battlefield. Mom's first installment was 3 weeks late, accompanied by a letter from her attorney explaining unexpected cash flow challenges. Christina responded by filing a motion for contempt of court. The second payment arrived the next day, overnight express, with tracking confirmation. Mom tried to claim the Miami condo as her primary residence, which would have protected it from forced sale under Florida homestead laws. Christina countered with evidence that Mom had lived in Westchester for 43 consecutive years and had only purchased the Miami property 18 months ago as an investment. The court ordered her to sell it. The condo sold for $620,000, significantly more than the $400,000 she owed the trust. I didn't ask what she did with the difference. That money was hers to keep, earned from her own investment, even if the initial purchase funds had been questionable. I wasn't interested in punishing her beyond what justice required. I just wanted the trust restored and protected. Aunt Pamela's husband, Gerald, who I'd always thought of as relatively harmless, was ordered to repay $215,000 in fraudulent consulting fees. He apparently tried to declare bankruptcy to avoid payment, but Christina had anticipated that move. She'd filed the trust claim as a fraud debt, which isn't dischargeable in bankruptcy. Gerald ended up selling his boat, his vintage car collection, and a vacation property in the Berkshires. Aunt Pamela stopped speaking to me entirely after that, which felt less like a loss and more like a relief. She sent one email, 6 months after the judgment, saying I'd destroyed her family's financial security over petty grudges and that she hoped I could live with that guilt. I deleted it without responding. There's no point arguing with people who fundamentally refuse to acknowledge reality. The Cape Cod property? It stayed in the trust. I had the entire house renovated, updated the electrical and plumbing, and established a small endowment to cover maintenance in perpetuity. Then I opened it up to family members who actually appreciated what it represented. Andrea brought her kids for 2 weeks that summer. Uncle Lawrence spent a month there working on his memoir. Several cousins I barely knew reached out asking if they could book time there. It became what Dad had always wanted, a gathering place for family, not a commodity to be liquidated for short-term gain. I never spoke to Mom again. She'd send occasional emails through her attorneys, usually around holidays or birthdays, with half-hearted attempts at reconciliation that always included some mention of the trust or the money she felt she was entitled to. I deleted them without reading past the first paragraph. Aunt Pamela tried to broker peace exactly once, inviting me to some family dinner where she promised Mom would apologize. I declined. Apologies without change are just words, and I'd heard enough of Mom's words to last several lifetimes. Trevor apparently told everyone who would listen that I'd stolen his inheritance, which was creative fiction, given that he'd never been entitled to anything from the trust in the first place. The story evolved over time until some cousins actually believed I'd manipulated Dad on his deathbed and forged documents. I stopped caring what they believed somewhere around the third iteration of the rumor. What I didn't expect was the support that emerged from unexpected corners of the family tree. Dad's cousin Ruth, who was 83 and lived in a nursing home in Vermont, sent me a handwritten letter on pale blue stationery. Her handwriting was shaky but legible, and the words hit harder than any legal victory. "Your father would be so proud of you," she wrote. "I watched your mother manipulate family finances for years, always taking credit for your father's hard work while spending money like it grew on trees. Harold knew what she was like, which is why he set up the trust the way he did. He told me once that you were the only person he completely trusted with the family's future. I'm glad you proved him right." The letter arrived on a particularly difficult day, one where I'd been second-guessing everything despite the court's validation. I must have read it 20 times, tracing my fingers over Ruth's careful script, feeling connected to Dad in a way I hadn't since he died. I drove to Vermont the following weekend to visit her. We spent 4 hours talking about Dad, about his childhood, about the man he'd been before I was born. Ruth had stories I'd never heard, memories that painted a fuller picture of who he was and what he valued. "Your mother wasn't always like this," Ruth said at one point, her voice softening with something that might have been pity. "When she and Harold first married, she was ambitious but fair. Success changed her. I think the more money they made, the more she needed to control. Harold saw it happening, but loved her anyway. He just made sure to protect what mattered most." That conversation shifted something in me. Mom hadn't always been the villain in this story. She'd chosen to become this person. Made decisions that prioritized wealth over relationships, control over connection. Understanding that didn't excuse her behavior, but it made it less personal somehow, less about my failures as a daughter, and more about her own evolution into someone I simply couldn't trust. The trust itself flourished under proper management. I brought in professional advisors, established clear documentation procedures, and created a family council where any blood relative could raise concerns or make suggestions. The commercial properties in Manhattan generated solid returns. The Westchester estate became a venue for family celebrations that didn't involve Mom or her immediate circle. The investment portfolio grew steadily through careful, conservative management that prioritized long-term stability over short-term gains. 18 months after that voicemail, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Trevor's ex-wife, someone I'd met exactly twice at family events. She'd heard about what happened and wanted me to know that Trevor had been stealing from their joint accounts for years, that Mom had actually encouraged it and helped him hide assets during their divorce. She'd lost custody of her kids partially because Mom had paid for Trevor's attorneys and provided testimony about her being an unfit mother. "I just wanted you to know you did the right thing," the message said. "That family is toxic and you're better off without them." I thanked her for reaching out but didn't pursue the information further. That chapter was closed. The book shelved permanently in the section of my life labeled Lessons Learned the Hard Way. 2 years after that voicemail, I met someone. His name was Nathan, and he was a high school history teacher with zero connection to my family or their world. Our first date lasted 6 hours, conversation flowing easily about everything and nothing. When he asked about my family, I gave him the abbreviated version. Complicated, estranged, not really in contact. "That sounds lonely," he said genuinely. "It used to be," I admitted. "But loneliness is just the absence of people. What I have now is peace, which is the presence of something much more valuable." We got married in the Cape Cod house 2 years later. Andrea was my maid of honor. Uncle Lawrence walked me down the aisle. The ceremony was small, intimate, filled with people who actually knew me, rather than people who felt obligated by blood to pretend they cared. Mom sent a gift, expensive crystal vases that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. There was no card, no message, just the gift itself. I donated it to a charity auction and used the proceeds to fund a scholarship in Dad's name at his alma mater. Ending. Sometimes, people ask if I regret how everything went down, if I wish I'd handled things differently or tried harder to maintain those family relationships. The question used to bother me, carried implications that I'd somehow failed in my duty as a daughter. Now, I just smile and change the subject. Because the truth is, I don't regret a single decision. That voicemail, telling me I was out, that they were moving on without me, was the most honest communication I'd ever received from my mother. She meant every word, right up until the moment she realized I controlled access to the money she'd been treating as her personal fund. My only regret is not saying okay sooner. Not taking that simple step toward freedom years before I finally found the courage. But growth comes when it comes, not when we wish it would. And there's something beautiful in finally becoming the person you were always meant to be. I still have that voicemail saved on my phone. Every few months, usually when I'm feeling nostalgic or doubting myself, I'll listen to it again.
"You're out.
Don't come back. We're moving on without you." Those words that were meant to destroy me, they set me free. And for that small act of cruelty, I'm almost grateful. Almost. Mostly, I'm just glad I listened, took her at her word, and built a life where family is defined by love and respect, rather than shared DNA and toxic obligation. The Hayes family trust continues to thrive. The properties are maintained beautifully. Future generations will benefit from Dad's vision and the boundaries I was finally brave enough to enforce. And somewhere out there, Mom is probably still telling anyone who will listen about her ungrateful daughter who stole everything. Let her talk. I've got a husband who loves me, family members who actually value my presence, and a beach house filled with memories of people who knew that some legacies are worth protecting at any cost. The final message came 3 years after that original voicemail. Mom's attorney sent formal notice that she was filing a lawsuit, claiming undue influence and seeking to overturn the trust modifications. Christina read the filing, laughed for a solid minute, actually laughed, and sent back a response referencing the sealed court records, the judge's explicit findings, and the statute of limitations that had expired 18 months prior. "She's desperate," Christina said. "This is what people do when they've lost control and can't accept reality." I didn't bother responding. Some conversations aren't worth having. Some relationships aren't worth saving. And some family ties are better cut cleanly than left to fester indefinitely. My phone hasn't rung with Mom's number in over a year now. The missed calls stopped. The voicemails ceased. Even the emails through attorneys have trailed off to nothing. Maybe she finally got the message I sent that very first night. Okay. Maybe she finally understood that I wasn't bluffing, wasn't playing games, wasn't going to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and access. Or maybe she just ran out of legal options and manipulative strategies, finally accepting that some doors, once closed, stay that way. Either way, I sleep soundly in a house filled with peace, wake up next to someone who values me for who I am rather than what I can provide, and manage a family legacy that honors the person who truly understood what family should mean. And every single day, I'm grateful for that voicemail. Those 12 words that gave me permission to finally, completely, irrevocably move on. Call to action, CTA, what about you? Have you ever had to choose between family obligation and your own peace? How did you navigate those impossible waters? Let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your stories.
Ok, du coup,
Oh putain.
malheureusement pour le chien,